Can you give me, if you give me 15 minutes of good attention, I will hopefully this morning give you a fresh angle on why Christmas is wonderful, on why this festive season is wonderful. Today marks the start of our Advent program. It's our countdown to Christmas. And as you can see from the slide I painstakingly made, I don't know all those people. In fact, I don't know any of those people. I simply stole the images off Google and put them all together, but they all have one thing in common. They obviously are observing or hearing something that's wonderful. And I want to say to you that our theme over this Advent time is around celebration and wonder, because this is a time to celebrate, and it is time of wonder. Advent, as Graham said last week, I think it was, Advent is basically from a Latin word meaning the coming or the arrival. Like when maybe you're sitting here now and you got somebody coming over for lunch. Whilst you're sitting there waiting for them to arrive, that is a sense of Advent. You're anticipating somebody's arrival. Who's getting family over Christmas? We're getting family from the UK. Yeah, they are going to die. It's going to be hot because they are having a freezing winter over there and we are having a cooker. So anyone else hosting people over Christmas? I'm not looking for accommodation. Don't get nervous. To have somebody coming over is a good thing, but there's a sense of expectation and anticipation while you wait for them, and that's the essence of Advent. There's this looking forward to, and indeed then once they arrive, there's the whole greeting and the celebration. There's a celebration of somebody who has arrived. And so at Advent, we celebrate the fact that Jesus came to earth, and we revel in the wonder of all that means. Over the next 3 weeks, I'm cunningly coming at Advent from 3 different angles, and so I ask you to journey with me over the next 3 weeks. But each one of them is a completely wonderful arrival of Jesus. The truth is, he has come to humanity. And so the first week, we're going to look at the wonder of the incarnation. If you've never heard the word incarnation, it basically means it's the episode where God became man. It's the first way that Jesus enters into humanity's story. He is born as a baby. You might know the story. He's born as a baby. He's born to a virgin in a really obscure village in Israel. His first night, indeed, according to the scriptures, was spent in a manger in a stable. When last were you in a stable? When last were you in a stable? Been a while. Yeah, you should go and visit one. Not a glamorous place to be. Nothing glamorous about it at all. And so we believe the following to be true, that Jesus was born as a baby, born to a virgin in an obscure village, and he spent his first night in a stable. You may know the story well, but I ask you for this morning, just for the remaining 11 minutes, I ask you to be really open to the fact that you might have missed the wonder of it, that you might just have missed the wonder of it, and that today you drill down into it again. Will you give yourself to that? What if it is an incredible thing? What if that we can just glibly pass over the wonder of the fact that God entered human history? Let me read this passage of scripture. In the beginning, the Word already existed. He was with God, and he was God. He was in the beginning with God. He created everything there is. Nothing exists that he didn't make. Speaking about Jesus. And then it says this, and so the Word became human, and he lived here on earth amongst us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the only Son of the Father. Just pause there for a moment. That's the Gospel of John. What it says is that Jesus has always been. He was not created. He has always been. He was with the Father in the beginning. He is God himself. But at some point, and that's what we're here to acknowledge this morning, that's what Christmas is about, is to acknowledge that God entered human history as a man, well, as a baby. Suddenly the Creator, just don't skip over this, the Creator joins his creation. The divine takes on human form. A fancy way to describe the incarnation, it's cool and a bit weird. So let me give it to you anyway. One theologian called it's the enfleshment of God. It's when God took on human flesh. I know, it's a bit grim when you enfleshment. The incarnation is the enfleshment of God. He didn't just exist as a supernatural, powerful, all-sovereign being, he came down and lived amongst us. I put it to you that it is an outrageous thing to consider that God would come and live amongst his people. It's outrageous that the divine would take on the fallibility and the ordinariness of flesh. It's unthinkable, it's true, but it's wonderful. I want to give you this morning, in the closing moments, 3 reasons why he did it. They're already ready for 3 reasons. Every good sermon has 3 points. This is a good sermon, has 3 points. All right. You're a poor listener if you only leave with 2, but I'm going to give it my best shot and give you all 3 points. They're going to come quickly, so strap yourself in. Here are the 3 wonderful reasons why Jesus came. Number 1, Jesus came to show us God. Let me read my notes. Jesus lived amongst real people so that we could know what God is like. When we read the Gospels, we can understand what God is like, what impresses him and what doesn't, how he interacts with both influential people and the nobodies of his day, how he takes time to mix with lost, confused, and broken people. Each aspect of Jesus' earthly life was a perfect representation of what God is like. If you want to know what he's like, you look at the life of Jesus. Jesus was loving, kind, and merciful, but he was also truthful, insightful, and focused. The pages of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell us the story of Jesus' life. And I put it to you, it's well worth the read. Because when you read what Jesus was like, he came to show us God. When you see what he is like, how he interacted, everything about him, that's what God is like. Yes? It's worth reading the Gospels. Mark is the easiest one to read if you're looking for a tip. Mark is the easiest gospel to read. It's action-packed. It's the fast and furious version of the life of Jesus. The first thing that's wonderful about the incarnation of Jesus is that he came to show us what God is like. It's a beautiful thing. I wonder what it must have been like to see him every day. It must have been pretty, strange, weird, just every day different. Seeing him deal with broken people, seeing him deal with kids, seeing him take on the religious establishment, seeing him do all kinds of radical miracles. What a life. He came to show us God. The second thing Jesus came to do is he came to show us God's way. I want to have a bit of a vent here, if you don't mind, so just fussbait for a moment. Jesus lived life the way it is best lived. Let me say that again. Jesus lived life the way it is best lived. He became human so that we need not flounder about following the teachings of this influencer and that podcaster. That was the vent, but wait, it's about to get more radical. He became human so that we don't flounder about figuring out this, who's right, this influencer, this Andrew Tate, that Jordan Peterson, this Oak, that, all of them. Jesus is the embodiment of the life we are called to live. His ways are perfect. His views, faultless. Every view he expressed is absolutely perfect. His thoughts were not still evolving. They were complete when he shared them. So yes, many people parade around today speaking with great confidence and conviction about worldviews and their life choices. And they have platforms now to do so. And yes, many of them have millions of followers on social media. But Jesus has had billions of followers, multiple billions of followers. And his followers have followed him over 2,000 years. And here's the thing, his followers are not like the other people. They're not already similar, and that's why they follow him. His followers often started on the other end of the spectrum and became followers. His followers span every culture. They cross every divide. And his number of followers is increasing daily, and their level of devotion is intensifying. And here's the reason why, because Jesus came to show us God's way. He is worth following. That's why we've given the whole year. That's been our theme. So the most followed person on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, whatever, all the fancy names, how many ever million followers you have on Instagram, I put it to you that those people will come and go, their influence will subside. But there's this man who lived 2,000 years ago, whose influence upon the world today still dictates our calendar and indeed most of the moral values of organizations that are doing incredible things. His influence is beyond measure. He is, even by atheist commendation, the most influential personality in all of history. There's no one comes even close to him. There's a wonderful book by John Ortberg called Who is This Man? I think there's 2 copies in the library if you want to pick it up and read it. Who is this man will blow your mind with the influence of Jesus Christ even in the world today. So I put it to you that he came to show us God. The second thing, he came to show us God's way. Lastly, if you've missed the first 2 points, you better listen well now, otherwise you're leaving with nothing. The third thing Jesus came to do is to save us. C.S. Lewis said the following: the Son of God became a man to enable men to become sons of God. Let me read it to you again. The Son of God became a man to enable men to become sons of God. Can I read you a quick story? Well, it's not such a quick story, but just listen to it. It's good. There was once a man who didn't believe in God, and he didn't hesitate to let others know exactly how he felt about religion and religious holidays. His wife, however, did believe, and she raised their children to also have faith in God, despite the husband's disparaging comments. So on one snowy evening, his wife was taking their children to a church service in the farm community in which they lived. They went there to talk about Jesus' birth. She came to ask him to come along, but he refused, answering, "That story is absolute nonsense. Why would God lower himself to come to earth as a man? It's just ridiculous." And so she left, the children with her, but he stayed at home. A little while later that evening, the winds grew stronger and the snow turned into a blizzard. As the man looked out the window, all he saw was this blinding snowstorm. And so he sat down to relax before the fire for the evening, and then he heard a loud thump. Something had hit the window. He looked out, but he couldn't see more than a few feet, so he waited for a little while for the snow to let up, and then he ventured outside to see what it had been that beat against his window. As he went outside in the field near his house, he saw a flock of wild geese. Apparently, they'd been flying south for the winter when they got caught up in the snowstorm and simply couldn't go on. The stranded geese then were lost and left stranded on his farm with no food or shelter. They just flapped their wings around and flew around in the field in low circles, blindly and aimlessly trying to survive, trying to make sense of it all. A couple of them had flown into the window. That was the noise. The man felt sorry for the geese and he wanted to help them. The barn, he thought, the barn would be a great place for them to stay overnight. It's warm and it's safe, and if they spend the night there, they could wait out the storm. So he walked over to the barn and he opened the doors nice and wide. Then he watched and waited, hoping they would notice the open barn and go inside. But the geese just fluttered around aimlessly and didn't seem to notice the barn or realize what it could mean for them. So the man decided to get their attention, but that just seemed to scare them. He moved them further away. Eventually, he went into the house. He came out with some bread, and he broke it up and slowly made a trail from where they were all the way to the barn, but they still didn't catch on, these geese. Now the man was getting frustrated. So he got in behind them and tried to shoo them towards the barn, but they only got more scared and scattered in every direction except the barn. Nothing he could do could help them to get into the barn, where they would be, in fact, warm and safe. "Why don't they follow me?" he exclaimed. "Can't they see this is the only place where they can survive the storm?" He thought for a moment and then realized it's because they wouldn't follow a human. "If only I were a goose," he thought, "then I could save them." Then he had an idea. He went into the barn. He got one of his own geese and he carried it in his arms. He circled around behind the flock of geese and he released his own goose, which then flew through the flock and straight into the barn. At this, the other stray geese, one by one, all followed them safely into the barn. The man stood silently for a moment, chuffed with himself, as the words he had spoken earlier replayed in his mind. "If only I were a goose, then I could save them." Then he thought about what his wife had said earlier. Why would God want to be like us? It's absolutely ridiculous. And then it all made sense. This is what God had done. We were like the geese, blind, lost, and perishing. And God had his son become like us so that he could save us. When I read that story, and I wanted to give it to you in a shorter format, but it's a very powerful image. I hope that it will live with you in your mind. Part of the wonder of the incarnation is that God had to become flesh in order to save us. You see, way back in the Garden of Eden, man rejected God. and started off on a path of continued rebellion against him. Continued brokenness and sinfulness followed. And you and I have all been down that path of rejecting God. We've all done it. The truth is that God would not leave us on that rebellious path. There's something in him that wants to redeem, that wants to save. Just like this hard-hearted man, something knew that this was not right. These geese needed to be saved. They could be saved. It was right there. And so God was like that. But he knew that we wouldn't follow anything but what we knew we would be comfortable following. And so he sent his son, not as a goose, but he sent his son as a man. And it is a beautiful story. And it is the story of Christmas. And so when we think of Christmas, I ask you to remember the wonder of Christmas, like these people's happy faces. Folks, this is a wonderful time. It's wonderful because the incarnation is wonderful for 3 reasons. Number 1, he came to show us God. Blows my mind. Whenever I read the Gospels, it blows my mind the way God is. Secondly, he came to show us the way of God. And thirdly, he came to save us. And so this morning I am saved. Of all of those things on that plaque, the one that is eternally true of me is that I'm saved. And there are those of you here this morning you'll have that sense in your heart even right now as I'm saying it. We once fluttered around like wild goose, not knowing what to do with ourselves and causing more chaos than good. But one day we decided to follow, and we've entered a safe place. It's still a crazy world, but we're in the safety of a barn. And so now that is true of us. I want to say to you that I feel like I'm saved. I feel saved. I feel saved. If you're here this morning and you don't feel it, you don't feel like your heart is saved, you feel like you're still floundering and trying to figure it out, I would encourage you to remember that Jesus came that might not be the case for you anymore. He didn't send a message. He didn't just write it in the stars one time. He could have. He sent his son. So great is his passion to see us saved, to see us taken off that path of destruction. So I'd like us to bow our heads for a word of prayer, and then we'll be done.